Today's video, we are going over a case study of somebody that I saw virtually and in person. We kind of did a little mixture where she presented with right side oblique pain. Sometimes people will also describe it as their QL. And opposite side hip and groin pain and popping and clicking. So we'll get into that about what we did and how she felt. Hi, my name is Dawn and this is Sebastian.
Hello.
We are at Performance Place Sports Care in Costa Mesa, and we are the locally world famous chiropractors here. So I'm going to get right into describing how this woman presented, what it felt like, and what provoked her. So let's put you kind of sitting up tall, and I can show everybody kind of where she was feeling this. So ultimately, she presented to the office. It was 3 weeks after initial onset of injury, where she was feeling oblique pain. When I think oblique, I think kind of the side body here. But for her, it was a little more of like the back side body that she was feeling and pointing to. She said after running, doing cleans, she does CrossFit as activity, and some barbell glute bridges or hip thrusters is when she started to feel that. Once that got worse, the popping and clicking and pain in the hip on the opposite side was also bothering her. She was one of those, can you show everybody the CrossFit position? These are our CrossFitters when they go through their day-to-day activity. A lot of times you'll see them kind of stuck in this spinal position, rib out position.
Chest up.
Chest up position.
Chest up.
There's a lot of muscle development and just types of activity in CrossFit that'll put you into this position. So she kind of looked like that. She was stuck into that pelvic tilt position, feeling tight mainly on this side. She wanted to know how to rehab through that oblique pain. She couldn't really do any overhead movement in CrossFit anymore. She noticed that as she went through that activity, like overhead pressing, some pull-ups, really anything with her arms above her head, it would make her oblique strain worse and her popping and clicking in her hip worse too. So questions?
Well, so overhead movements bothered her oblique. That makes sense, but it bothered her groin?
It bothered her groin
How
too.
so?
So to kind of just simplify this a little bit, when we're in this position, when the pelvis is tilted forward like that, you're actually robbing your hip joint of space. And so as she went throughout movement, like say a squatting pattern or a clean pattern, anytime she did that hip hinge movement, she would run out of space in that hip a whole lot sooner than she would if she were to be in a more optimal pelvic position. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So how would you coach her out of something like that? Did you coach her out of stuff like that, or did you just treat her with passive modalities?
No, so ultimately when I saw her, I wanted to kind of rule in or rule out a few different things that I was thinking was going on with her. One, I wanted to know if her oblique was really truly strained or if it was something else going on. We wanted to see if there was any spinal components to this. A lot of times hip pain, even popping, groin pain, adductor pain, oblique and QL pain can all be more related to the spinal nerves, the nerves that refer out of the back and supply those muscles. I wanted to make sure that that wasn't playing a role. I wanted to see with popping and clicking in the hip if there was a labrum issue or if there was any hip impingement going on that side.
Can things like nerve or back involvement create feelings of tightness?
Absolutely. Yep. There's something that if you guys are interested, or if there might be a webinar that pops up on the screen right now that you can take advantage of for hip and groin pain. But there's these things we call dermatome patterns, and that webinar will cover some of that describes what this is, or you can Google it. But they come out of the spine, and the higher ones in the kind of mid-back or upper lumbar spine wrap around to the front here. So things like tight obliques or kind of like sports hernia types pains, groin pain can come from spinal spots like that.
Yeah, there's a good example of one actually is for sciatica with people. They can touch their toes like I can't, and they say, well, my hamstrings feel tight. Well, clearly they feel tight because they're not tight because you have the range.
Yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't really truly a muscle strain happening with her that we realized. It was more of this stuck position that she was in, this open scissor position that was really putting stress on the muscles and nerves back there. We also realized too that her hip on that side was actually also related to the spine. So both of those things actually responded well to the exercises that I gave her. I didn't have to do two separate things.
We gonna do exercises now?
Yeah, one other thing, in her squatting pattern, she was loading more to the oblique side. Sebastian will show you here, so to her right.
Oblique, this is my oblique side?
So yeah, this is kind of over exaggerating it, but yes, we'll notice as we do squat patterning with people, we'll see if they're maybe shifting to one side more than the other, which can help explain why popping and clicking in the hip, hip impingement or sensitivity, or even one side of the spine is a little bit more sensitive.
You know, sometimes too, like I know that we usually test with like the feet together, you know, so they can't cheat it. But sometimes people actually appear to squat straight, but in this case, I would imagine she went like this. So this foot's like way out there,
Yeah.
but she's still squatting like, I mean, this is dramatic.
Yeah.
But the foot flares.
Totally. I had her show me normal squat position first, and I saw a little bit of that shifting, and then it was, well, let's see what happens when we bring the feet a little bit closer together, toes straight, and it was a lot more exaggerated. So yeah, we got a lot of information out of just a simple movement assessment for her.
Good. What do you want to do?
Cool. So first thing that we tried was just seeing if we can reduce discomfort. I believe she had pain with squatting, bending backwards, side bending, and reaching overhead. And so what we did is we put her into a child's pose position. Can we start you on your hands and knees first?
Here?
The reason that I did this first was because sometimes sensitivity in the groin can come on fairly quickly as you sit your butt back to your heels. So what I had her do was slowly crawl yourself backwards. She's like, oop, my groin right there. Okay, pause. Can you push me up? Does your groin pain go away?
Yes.
She says yes. Cool, let's do that 10 times. So she did it 10 times. And then we saw, okay, now are you still feeling groin pain? No? Can we sit back a little further? Right there, it came on again. Push me up 10 more times. So ultimately what this is doing is it's reversing that position we're talking about that she was in, opening up space in the hips and allowing the nerves that we're talking about in the spine to breathe a little bit. So really it doesn't take very much time for some of that sensitivity to diminish. Eventually we could get her all the way back into this child's pose position. And we started to cue some proper breathing for her because long-term benefit for a CrossFitter, we're going to talk about kind of like intra-abdominal pressure, proper bracing for just kind of overall long-term, what am I looking for here? Like longevity in her sport is what we were doing. So took her through this, got up, retested all the things that were painful for her. I believe the oblique changed the quickest. So that to me tells me that is not a muscle strain if doing something like that is making her feel better, because really we're actually probably putting those muscles that were affected on a stretch, which if it's a true muscle issue might actually provoke it.
Yeah. What do you think about, like, I know there's people watching this are probably thinking, well, the clicking, popping, it's really hard to get away from that idea. Like, so you're flexing a hip that may be a labral tear or like a snapping hip syndrome. Is that okay to do?
Good point. So overall, we did like a quick overview of her. We definitely tested to see, is this really truly a labral issue or not? She also would diminish, or she would separate the popping and clicking is not painful. It never locks up on me. It just kind of feels like, you know, some people when they do their like running warm-ups, they'll do this whole thing and you can kind of hear like the popping in the hip when that happens. We kind of identified her popping and clicking was more of like a tendon running over a bony prominence and not a true labral issue. So we were okay with exploring this.
Okay.
Yep. So once we realized that that changed both of her discomforts, we realized it was probably something a little more spinal. And so I wanted to also address that she had some issues in that overhead motion. So I put her into, can we go into like a DNS supine position? So there were progressions of this that I had to take her through, but for video purposes, I want to show you what we did. We went feet up, knees up in the air. Good, and we're going to find a nice, easy, flat back to the ground here. And we wanted to focus on that rib position, because right here, if we were to have her in this position, she was stuck up like that. Move your elbows real quick. So you'll see that we call these like rib boobs right here. So her ribs were sticking up to the ceiling like crazy. So we slowly, with each breath out, work those ribs down into the front pockets, and we see if she can just breathe and hold this position for some time. We won't have arms overhead quite yet because that makes it a little bit harder. So we just cued breathing, proper breathing, got the belly working, no groin pain in this position, no oblique pain in this position. So we made it a little bit harder once she was here.
Well, don't you think we should be stretching it though? I feel like stretching it would be the answer for everybody.
Stretching what?
Stretching the hip flexor and the oblique.
There is definitely a time and place to explore some stretching. For us in this office, we probably leave that stuff more towards the end because we see too many times that actually provokes or does hardly anything for people. There's a lot of other stuff that we can do to reduce tightness before we start stretching the muscle that's already provoked.
Okay.
Cool. Hands up to the ceiling. Beautiful. Keeping that same rib position, keeping that same breathing pattern that we worked through. Can she control that as she now reaches overhead? Keeping in mind that this was one of those things that kept provoking her. My groin, my oblique, my QL, it keeps hurting when I do overhead motions. Well, this is the reason we went here. Can we teach her how to not use her spine, low back, and hips when she's doing overhead motions? She's learning to do some better abdominal control here, We're getting some more uprighting in the mid-back, getting the mid-back to move a little bit better. And this got her belly working and burning pretty well.
Yeah, but doing this without any weight, I mean, duh, come on. Like, when she puts weight over her head again, it's just going to hurt again, right?
Not necessarily. So that's why there's definitely progressions to this. I would say within the first visit, we were able to put weight in her hands with this and got it to a point where it's about finding the hardest thing that you can do well. It doesn't always need to be hard like a full CrossFit routine, but can I see that you can control this so the brain can learn this pattern, and that way we can make it into a more challenging exercise like her snatches, her cleans, things of that sort in the future.
Great. I don't have any more questions then.
Go ahead and roll on to obliques. There we go, perfect. So now the next thing I wanted to do was address that shifting pattern we saw in her squat. I wanted to get pain away from the groin and more into that glute on that provoking side. So what we did here is we perked her up like there was a campfire burning. Excuse me, a little burp there. And then we found side of the knee into the floor here, squish, squish, squish. What do you feel?
My butt cheek.
Perfect. That's exactly what we want. We don't want any groin pain in this. If you're having groin pain, we'll just play with knee position. Usually kind of bringing it down a little bit will help. So then we can perk up against the fire or away from the fire, press the knee. Here, if we're feeling glute, then we want to progress it and lift up like a little critter is going to crawl underneath your butt cheek here. Hold and breathe. And as long as we can control that, can you take that toe and dip it into an imaginary pond there?
Oh, that got really hard.
And come on back and control it down. Doing that to a fatiguing amount is what we wanted for her. So kind of to the point where she started to feel like a bicep pump into that left butt cheek. No groin pain, no oblique pain while performing this exercise. Got her up, retested range of motion, retested overhead, retested her squat pattern. I think she was like 70% better within that first hour together.
Great.
Yeah.
So what do you think you'll end up doing with her later?
Well, since then, we've definitely had a few more visits, and we worked more on that core control, taking her up off the floor and into her things that she does for sport. So just getting her brain to learn that pattern going forward. For her specifically, her programming was a lot of 2 feet down, squatting that way, cleans, snatches. So we started to actually work more single leg stuff for her to build it in, supplemental, separate to her program at her gym. And she noticed that she was just having a whole lot more benefit just building that into her program.
I'm just curious, on what day did you put weights in her hand again and clear her for exercise?
The first day.
Okay.
Fairly quickly, we can do that most of the time. And so, yeah, I thought this was a really cool case to share for a lot of you if you may be experiencing one or all of those things. Yeah.
Great. Well, if you guys have any questions about Dawn's story, you can reach out to us. Our link is in the description below, and we do have a webinar in the corner which has popped up, which covers things like groin pain. We don't have anything on oblique up there necessarily, but we do have other articles and videos on the oblique on our channel. So subscribe to the channel, like this video, and use the search bar, which has an exhausting amount of videos on our channel. We'll see you next time.